May 1944, a Mustang screams down at 700 feet per second toward a German convoy. The dive angle is 60. Control surfaces shudder. The airframe groans. Every pilot in the squadron has been told this maneuver will kill you. But Lieutenant Robert Strobel isn't pulling up. He's counting rabbits on the canvas of supply trucks growing larger in his gun sight. In 18 seconds, he will either prove time possible or become another name on the missing aircrew list. Northern France breathes differently under occupation. The hedgerows blur green and gray. Villages screech silent beneath church steeples that no longer ring bells at noon. Roads scary overmatched supply columns day and night feeding the Atlantic Wall fortifications. That stretch from Belgium to Brittany. Every gallon of fuel, every crate of ammunition. Every replenishment from travels these narrow arteries between railheads and frontline depots. Allied fighter bombers hunt them relentlessly. Thunderbolts and typhoons strafe convoys at shallow angles, raking trucks with 50 caliber rounds and rockets. But the math is brutal. A fighter approaching at 15 sees its target for maybe 3 seconds. Deflection changes constantly. Bullets spray wide. Most passes score hits only. Maybe the vehicles before the Palamas pull away to avoid ground collision or flak concentration. German logistics officers know this. They space convoys. They move at dawn and dusk when light plays tricks. They position flak wagons every fifth vehicle. Quad-mounted 20s that can shred an aircraft in a single burst. Second boys bleed, but they keep moving. Panzer divisions in Normandy keep fighting. The 8th Air Force needs tow trucks stop. Not damaged. Stop burning. Blocking the road so nothing behind them can pass. Higher command issues emphatic guidance. Destroy transportation networks. Cut the enemy's tendons. But no one explains how a pilot is supposed to do that when doctrine, physics, and survival instincts say the same thing. Stay shallow, stay fast, stay alive. If this story matters to you, tap like and subscribe. Robert Strobel grew up in Ohio farm country where angles mattered. His father ran a grain operation outside of Toledo. Every autumn meant calculating hopper trajectories, adjusting combine blades, understanding how speed and ascent affected yield. Nothing abstract, just geometry. You could see in falling wheat and dust patterns. Hugh was 22 when he enlisted, slender build, quiet voice. The kind of young man who listened more than he spoke, and noticed that things others dismissed as irrelevant. Flight school instructors noted his smooth hands on the stick, his uncanny ability to judge distance without instruments. He didn't yank the Mustang through maneuvers. He guided it, felt it. By spring of 1944, he was assigned head of the 361st Fighter Group, flying top cover and bomber escort out of Botham in eastern England. The P-51 was still new now that pilots were learning usages. Range like nothing before at dot speed that embarrassed Luftwaffe's above 20,000 feet. But down low in the weeds where ground attic happened, it was just another fighter trying not to become a fireball. Strobel flew the standard missions. Strafe when you see opportunity. Don't fixate. Don't press. The pilots who pressed ended up flying into the ground or catching. Aflac shelled through the coolant system in, gliding 10 miles to a belly landing in enemy territory if they were lucky. He watched those shallow strafing runs. He watched the gun camera footage during debriefs. Tracers walked across fields, clipped fenders, shattered windshields. Rarely did a truck explode. Rarely did a convoy stop. They just kept rolling. And the next day, another flight would hit another convoy with the same results. There had to be a better geometry. That problem was dwell time. A fire screaming past at 300 knots gives its guns maybe the seconds on target. At shallow angles, the bullets arrived almost horizontally, punching froth and canvas and wood, or rarely hitting engines, fuel tanks, or cargo deep inside the truck beds. Damage was superficial. Pilots expended thousands of rounds for marginal effect. Some treat rockets, but rockets required steady flight and forward speed, making the attacking aircraft a beautiful target for German gunners, who'd learn to track the contrails and host the sky with flak. Hit rates were abysmal. A study from 9th Air Force estimated 1 in 12 rockets struck within 20 feet of aim point. Others advocated skip bombing, bouncing small bombs off roads into convoys. It worked against ships and mediums. Against trucks it was a gamble. Fuses had to be perfect. Approach had to be suicidally low. Angerman flag crews loved a predictable bomber run. Higher command considered the problem intractable. Accept the inefficiency. Make up for it with volume. Send more sorties, expend more ammunition. The war was being won by industrial output anyway. Wireless pilots experimenting with standard tactics worked well enough. But well enough wasn't enough. Every truck that reached the front carried bullets that would kill Allied infantry. Every supply convoy that slipped through meant another day of fighting in the Bow Wedge. Another week until breakthrough. Strobel studied the angles in his head. He sketched diagrams on the back-off navigation charts. If you came down steep, nearly vertical, your guns would fire almost straight into the top of the vehicle. Engines sit in front. Fuel tanks sit in the middle. Cargo sits exposed. A steep dive gave you a stationary target picture and maximum wheel time, because your rate of closure was deliberate, controlled by throttling and dive brakes if needed. But Doctrine was clear. Dives steeper than 45 were for dive bombers, not fighters. The Mustang wasn't stressed for that, or sub-manuals claimed. And even if the airframe held, the pilot would black out from G-forces during pull-out or simply wouldn't have enough altitude to recover before impact. It was by every measure Azure-side technique. May 17th, the morning briefing covered the usual escort bombers to Brunswick, then free hunt on return leg. Strobel said nothing during the briefing, but after the group commander left, he mentioned his idea Tawa wingman over weak coffee at the dispersal hut. He explained the geometry, showed the sketches. One pilot lied outright. The other just shook his head. The flight surgeon, overhearing, told him flatly that a 60 dive would put 8 Gs on him during recovery. He'd gray out, maybe lose consciousness. Even if he stayed awake, the Mustang's elevator authority might not be enough. He'd auger straight into French soil at terminal velocity, and he'd need a shovel to recover his dog tags. Strobel asked if anyone had actually tested it. Silence. No one had because no one was that reckless. He didn't argue. He just nodded and walked out to his aircraft. The crew chief was finishing the pre-flight, wiping oil from the cowling. Strobel asked him a simple question. Could the airframe handle a sustained 60 dive at combat power? The chief looked at him like he'd asked if viewings could be removed in flight. Structurally, maybe. But why wouldn't you try? Strobel didn't answer. He climbed into the cockpit and ran his checks with the same methodical calm he always did. Magnetos, trim, fuel mixture, oxygen flow. The Merlin engine naked, caught, and settled into a smooth, rattling idle. Around him, 11 other Mustangs were starting up. Bluick's house ghosting across the tarmac in early light. He thought about his father adjusting the combined blades, chasing the optimal angle season after season until he got it right. Some of the mess you had to test what everyone said was impossible because sometimes everyone knew was wrong. The mission went as planned until the return leg. Bombers struck their targets. Luftwaffe resistance was light. A few 109s bouncing the formation over Hanover before disengaging. By early afternoon, the bomber stream wash headed home, and the fighters were at least a ground attack. Strobel's flight dropped down to 8,000 feet, scanning the French countryside for targets of opportunity. The radio crackled with callouts, locomotives, barges, troop columns. Then someone spotted it. A convoy, maybe 20 vehicles, strung along a road south of Rouen. No cover, minimal flak evident. That flight leader called the attack standard approach, single pass, shallow angle, don't press. Strobel rogered Theckel, but he had no intention of following it. He peeled off early, climbing another 0 feet while the rest of the flight descended into their strafing run. From 9,500 feet, he could see the entire convoy, trucks in tight intervals, a few command cars, one flak wagon near the rear, its crew likely scanning the horizon for the fighters they could hear, but not yet see. Strobel rolled inverted and pulled the nose down. 60. The airspeed indicator climbed 300 knots. 400. The Mustang's nose pointed at a supply truck near the front of Theckel like a rifle aimed at a stat. Binary target. He adjusted throttle, feeling the dive stabilize. No buffet, no vibration, just smooth, contraletticed. The truck grew in his gun sight. He could see the canvas cover rippling in the wind, could see the driver's side mirror, could see individual tire treads. His altitude unwound. 60,005,000. His finger rested on the trigger dot at 4,000 feet. He opened fire. 650 erupted, their recoil shuddering throughout their frame. Tracers poured down in an almost vertical line. He walked their rudder gently, sliding the stream across the truck's length. Sparks erupted from hood. The canvas shredded. Then afflesh, a bloom of orange flame, and Thetrick disintegrated as fuel or munition cooked off. He didn't pull up. He pushed the nose forward slightly, tracking to the second vehicle. The dive angle held. Airspeed bled off just enough to keep him subsonic. He fired again. Another truck exploded, then a third. His tracers were hitting dead center every time, because the target wasn't moving relative to his gunsight. It was like shooting at a picture, altitude 30,000, still, diving. Fourth truck, fifth, sixth. Explosions rippled down the convoy in sequence. The flak wagon swung its guns skyward, but couldn't oppress them enough to track something coming almost straight down. Strobel's bullets tore through its thin armor, and it erupted in a spray of white-hot fragments. 7, 8, 9. The convoy was a chain of fireballs now. Trucks slamming into the wreckage ahead of strivers, panicked or died at the wheel. He fired through the 11th vehicle and finally eased back on the stick, altitude 1,800 feet. The J-force crushed him into his seat. Gray crept in at the edges of his vision. His arms felt like lead, but the Mustang responded. Thenos came up, the horizon leveled. Heavy toned out at 900 feet, still flying, still conscious. Behind him, 12 trucks burned. The road was completely blocked. Black smoke climbed into the afternoon ski like a funeral pea. His wingmen were shouting over the radio, asking if he was alive, asking what the hell just happened. Strobel keyed the mic and told them he was fine. His voice was calm, almost casual. He climbed back to altitude and rejoined the formation fourth flight home. In the gun camera footage, reviewed that evening in stunned silence, every detail was visible. The steep dive, the precision, the methodical destruction. 12 vehicles in a single pass, no rockets, no bombs, just gravity, geometry, and 6 machine guns firing into the heart of each target. The squadron intelligence fiker replayed it 3 times, then held it at Strobel and asked how he'd served the pull out. Strobel said he kept the speed below red line and trusted the airframe. The officer asked if he'd do it again. Strobel said headed and see why not. Someone in the back of the room muttered that it was still suicide, but the gun camera didn't lie. 12 trucks, 1 pass, 0 damage to the Mustang. The math had just changed. Within a week, 3 other pilots in the 360 first tried the technique. 2 succeeded. 1 pushed to hard, pulled it to late, and bent his airframe on recovery. He landed safely, but the Mustang was written off, its fuselage buckled behind the cockpit. The lesson was clear. The maneuver worked, but only within narrow parameters. Altitude discipline, speed discipline, tolerance awareness. Flight leaders began teaching it selectively. Not to WWII, not to the aggressive Palatswa, already pressed to hard, but to the smooth ones, the calculators, the ones who could hold a dive angle without fixating, who could judge polo altitude by field dot by June. After the Normandy invasion, the technique spread across other fighter groups. Thunderbolts and Mustangs began hitting convoys with devastating efficiency. A single flight could destroy an entire logistics column in minutes. German supply officers started moving convoys only at night, then only in small packets. Then, when possible, not at all. Rail traffic increased. Rail yards became target-trick environments. The logistical stranglehold tightened. 9th Air Force compiled data through the summer. Convoy. Destruction rates tripled. Ammunition expender per vehicle killed dropped by 40%. Pilot losses on ground attack missions fell because time over target decreased, and flak crews couldn't track near vertical dives effectively. No formal doctrine was ever written. No manual ever updated. It remained a technique passed pilot to pilot, flight to flight, learned through demonstration and practice, but its effects were immeasurable. In August, a captured German quatermain reported that supply shortages were crippling frontline units more than direct combat losses. Trucks weren't reaching their destinations. Fuel wasn't arriving. Divisions were mobilized not by enemy tanks, but by empty jerry cans. Strobel flew 68 more combat missions. He refined the technique, experimented with different angles for different targets. Trains required shallower dives because of the moved. Barges needed lead calculation, but trucks, stationary or slow-moving on roads, were always the same. Steep, controlled, lethal. Hanover promoted the method, never claiming credit. In the briefings, he described it clinically as though he were explaining crop rotation. Just angles and timing, just paying attention to what worked. Other pilots called it the Strobel dive. He shrugged off the name. It wasn't his dot, it was just physics that everyone had been too cautious to try. The war ended, Strobel returned to Ohio. He never flew again, went back to farming, took over his father's operation. Spent 40 years optimizing yields and teaching the same patient geometry. That had also turned a fighter into a precision instrument. He rarely spoke about Dior. When pressed, he mentioned the missions in passing, the way some of you might mention a previous job. No drama, no embellishment, just a thing he'd done when it needed doing. In 1983, a military aviation historian tracked him down, asked for an interview about the dive technique that had reshaped ground attack doctrine. Without ever being formally recognized, Strobel agreed, bluntly briefly. He explained the mechanic sagging the same way he had in 19 for dot angle, speed, altitude. He mentioned that most people overthink survival. Sometimes the dangerous thing is safer because no one expects it. The historian asked if he'd been afraid during that first dive. Strobel thought for a moment. Then he said fear wasn't the right word. Uncertainty maybe, but uncertainty was just a gap in knowledge. You tested, you learned, you adjusted. He died in 1991. No obituary mentioned the 12 trucks. No memorial listed the convoys he'd stop at or the infantry lives saved by ammunition. That never arrived. He was remembered as a good farmer, a patient teacher, a man who believed problems had solutions if you looked at them from their right angle. But in the cockpits of phatic aircraft for generations after, the principle endured. When doctrine fails, test. When everyone says it's impossible, check the math yourself. When survival and mission seem opposed, sometimes they're the same thing seen from different altitudes. Strobel didn't change warfare through brilliance or heroism in the cinematic sense. He changed it by refusing to accept inefficiency when a better geometry existed, by trusting an airframe more than the fear surrounding it, by understanding that the most dangerous path is sometimes the one news dared to walk. 12 trucks in 18 seconds. Not because he was reckless, because he was patient enough to see what panic and doctrine had obscured. That courage isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of logic when everyone else has stopped thinking. The Mustang could take the dive. The pilot could take the G's. The enemy couldn't take the geometry. And for a few crucial months in 1944, that equation rewrote the math of ground attack over occupied rope, 160-degree dive at a time.